Hi friends, let's look at some activities for reviewing last year's concepts at the beginning of the school year. A lot of us approach the start to the year wondering where to even begin with our lesson planning and how we are going to know what students remember from before summer break. And this can be true if we are coming back to the same campus, but it's also a huge question for anyone starting at a new school or in a new position. So how do we know what students know? Let's spend a few videos thinking that through. We'll do a rhythmic example here today, and then a melodic example in the next video, and then a summative evaluation after that to kind of tie everything together. If we were to take away the word know and replace it with something else, a little bit more descriptive, what could we replace it with? Because sometimes we say, how do I know what they know? And what we actually mean is, how do I know what notation symbols they have memorized? And that is a really wonderful question if that's the thing that we truly want to know. But chances are we are hoping to find out a little bit more. And in that case, asking a different question is going to lead us down a different path. So some examples of different questions might be, how do I get a sense of what students understand about melodic relationships? Or how do I get a sense of what rhythmic patterns students can orally analyze? Or how do I get a sense of what students can evaluate about their ensemble performance? We could also say, how do I get a sense of what students can create with their musical knowledge and skills? All of these questions are totally different, right? And they would also suggest different assessment activities, which is what we'll look at today. To get started, we're going to need some sort of idea of what we taught last year, with the understanding that, of course, just because we taught it does not mean that students necessarily learned it. But practically speaking, that means that it is very helpful to have some type of scope and sequence that we can use to pinpoint where we got in a flow of concepts. And I'll link a video below about yearly planning if you are interested in hearing more about that flow of concepts and putting it together for your own teaching and things like that. Something important to note here is that our scope and sequence, this is moving from the known to the unknown. And that means that we learn each new concept by comparing it to what we already know, to the things that came before it. So for example, when we talk about 4 sounds on a beat, we are talking about a new sound, and we know that it's a new sound because we can compare it to what came before it. That is things like 2 sounds on a beat, or 1 sound over 2 beats, or 0 sounds on a beat, or 1 sound on a beat, all of that stuff. We are moving from what we know to the unknown, and we compare the unknown to everything that came above it in this sequence. And that is important for our review process, because it means that when we review something later in the sequence, by necessity, we are also reviewing all the other concepts that came before it. We're still using a sound before sight learning process here. This review process is like a compact version of what I use for just regular concept plans. And all of the big phases are still there: an active experience and establishing communication, and then applying and extending what we've learned. The difference here is that the process is not going to take as long as it normally would, because students, ideally, already know the material, or at least that's what we are hoping to find out. And students are going to be doing most of the actual teaching instead of me. So for an active experience, we are going to use repertoire from last year, or we are also going to introduce some new repertoire with the same concepts. Then we can establish communication. That's when students are going to teach us about the classroom label and the classroom notation that we use in this classroom. And then from there, we get to apply what we've learned. We're going to find a way to extend it or transfer it in a new way. So let's take a lower elementary situation where we want to review ta, toddy, and ta rest. So 1 sound on a beat, 2 sounds on a beat, and 0 sounds on a beat. Thinking through what we want students to know, things like, in this class, we have a vocabulary and a common notation practice for rhythms like ta rest and toddy and ta. We also want students to know that not all musicians write these rhythms the same way or use them in the same way in music, and sometimes real musicians call these sounds something else, and sometimes real musicians write them differently, and sometimes real musicians don't write them down at all. All of that is the knowledge piece. But there are also things that we want students to be able to do with these rhythms. So skills are things like singing and speaking songs and rhymes with known rhythmic components. We want students to move to known rhythms. We want them to orally identify known rhythms, read and write rhythms in standardized Western notation and with graphic notation. We also want them to use rhythms in part work, things like ostinati. And then we also want them to make some creative decisions. So things specifically like improvising and arranging. Now, we will not do all of those things in one activity here today, but looking at this concept plan, backing up, all of those skills are things that we are going to use in this larger review sequence. And then thinking through the beginning of the year, what is the point of all of this? And to answer that question, we can also add a macro concept or an enduring understanding or an essential question, things like that, that kind of add a layer of depth to these concept plans. So for me, at the beginning of the year, I really care about the idea of ensemble and building a classroom community. So everything that we do, I want to kind of be reinforcing this sense that every musician in the classroom is important to the ensemble. So ensemble is our macro concept here. So let's jump in with A Peres y Nones, and this song is A Peres y Nones, vamos a jugar. Y el que quede solo, ese perderá. What we are going to review here is ta, tati, and ta, rest. Why this song? Rhythmically, all of the rhythms here have 1 and 2 and 0 sounds on a beat. So this entire song we can use for this type of review. We can use any part of the song for reviewing these rhythms. What are we going to do with it? We are going to work as an ensemble to perform ostinati with 1 and 2 and 0 sounds on a beat. That's the kind of end of this activity. And then how will we know what students remember? We are going to listen and watch them use the concepts in the context of the game. We want to make sure that students have really embodied these rhythms. Next, we're going to listen to them articulate that there are beats with 1 and 2 and 0 sounds on them. And then we'll listen to them give us the classroom label and what we call these sounds in this class. And then last, we're going to listen and observe them transform these sounds into some different ostinato options that we can layer together as a class, as a full ensemble. And then if at any point we notice that students are having a hard time with any of these steps, you know, articulating what they hear or recalling the label and the classroom symbol or having trouble kind of maintaining their part in the ostinato, then that is really great because we've just answered our question of where we should begin the year, right? So now we know where to pick up. So let's start off by singing the song and playing the game. For this, we're all going to stand in a circle and walk around while we sing the song. Importantly, for what's coming up later, we're also going to walk while we keep a steady beat in our feet. The translation to this song is even odds, let's play a game. And then the second half is the one who is left is the one who remains, the one who is out, the one who gets left behind, that kind of idea. So even odds, one person is going to walk around the inside of the circle in the opposite direction, and they are holding a number of objects in their hands, like a number of erasers or a number of paper clips or a number of, you know, anything small like buttons that you have in your classroom. And they will either have an even number of these small erasers, whatever they are, or they will have an odd number of these. So we walk around singing, A Peres y Nones, vamos a jugar, y el que quede solo, ese perderá. And at the end of the song, the person in the middle is going to stop in front of whomever they are closest to in the circle. And that person gets to guess if the person in the middle of the circle has an even or an odd number of objects in their hand. And this is a game that students absolutely love. They will play this over and over and over. But let's extend that a little bit to notice and explore some of the sounds that we hear in this song. So we are going to walk in a circle while we're keeping the steady beat. And how many steady beats are in our song? I'm not sure. I wasn't listening. No problem. Let's do it again. So we're going to think about how many steady beats. Another way to think about that is how many times do your feet hit the floor? So let's do it and we'll count together. Operaciones, vamos a jugar, y el que quede solo, ese perderá. And if you said 16, that is the answer that I agree with. Sometimes some people say 15, and that's kind of interesting. How many times do your feet hit the ground when there is not a sound coming out of your mouth? How many times do your feet touch the ground where there is not a sound or a syllable or a word coming out of your mouth? I don't know. Let's find out. Operaciones, vamos a jugar. Y el que quede solo, ese perderá. So 2 times in this song, our feet touch the ground, but there's not a sound. And in this class, when that happens, when we have a beat with no sound, how do we write it? What do we call it? And this is where we go through the review process and students are giving us the answer. What do we call no sound on a beat? What do we call 1 sound on a beat? What do we call 2 sounds on a beat? And how do we write these things? And this is also our time to review that, of course, not all musicians use these same words or this same notation practice for these sounds, but this is what we use in this ensemble, in this classroom group. So now let's build some ostinato patterns here. I have even, which is 2 sounds on a beat. I have odd, and I have no sounds on a beat. So maybe I decide that I want us to go, let's say even. Oh, we could just do that. Even, rest, even, even. Could you try that? Even. That's your part to do. So students are doing the ostinato and the teacher adds the song. Operaciones, vamos a jugar. Y el que quede solo, ese perderá. Great. So students are whispering and clapping, or they can whisper and body percussion, of their choice, these patterns. I'm starting with 2 cards, and then we will hopefully extend to 4. That's an option that we have. So if I say odd, rest, even. We can try that. 1, 2, let's clap it and whisper odd. Try it on rhythm syllables. It sounds like ta, toddy, toddy, ta, toddy, toddy, ta. And then students keep doing that, ta, while the teacher adds the song. Operaciones, vamos a jugar. Y el que quede solo, ese perderá. Great. Okay, so notice that when we start adding different things to this song, like clapping and whispering and the ostinato, and then the teacher adding the song all together, notice how important it is for the ensemble to stay together. Notice how important it is to listen to everyone around you and really act like a musical team. And then also notice how hard it would be if you had to do this ostinato correctly all by yourself, right? And it's so much more supportive for us to do it together in this classroom group. So which part of this is review and which part of this is assessment? In this case, the activities themselves are the assessment. Again, we're going to listen and watch students as they interact with these concepts in the activities, and we just notice what we see. So first, we're going to observe them using the rhythmic concepts in the singing game, and do we see and do we hear that students have internalized these rhythms? That's the question that we're going to ask ourselves. Then we're going to listen to them as they articulate what they hear as far as 1 and 2 and 0 sounds on a beat. That's a verbal response, or depending on how you want to structure it, they can also show you how many sounds they hear by putting the number on their forehead or on their chest. And then we're going to label the sounds with classroom vocabulary. And then last, we're going to listen and watch students perform with our whole classroom ensemble as we put these rhythms together in really different ways, building those ostinato patterns. So this is an option for active review and assessment at the beginning of the year. We are taking what we have already taught from last year and we're putting it in an authentic musical context, and then we're asking students to basically teach us about what they notice and what they remember from last year. And that's the assessment process, where I give you a learning context and then you teach me about what you need next. Assessments are just that. They are where the students teach us how to be better teachers for them. And today we looked at this in the context of a rhythm review activity, but in the next activity, we'll look at this same process, this same structure with a melodic element for reviewing concepts from last year at the beginning of this year.